Hi, this is John Rowell for the Rowell Report. Today is Saturday, September 13th, 2025. And you may be wondering today, hey, didn't I vote for that peace president? Yeah, the man called Donald Trump, the guy who said he was going to end all wars, he was going to bring in this era of peace for the planet. Uh, why did I vote for him? And then we're going in the opposite direction. Um, so anyway, we have President Trump continuing to harp on the number of losses every day, how much human life matters to him, while he continues to give bombs and military assistance to a country that's blowing up women, children, shooting them in food lines, waiting to receive badly needed nutrition so that they can live, water, and all that. And he sees all that, doesn't say anything, but yet somehow in Ukraine, all these lives are, so precious to him, and you kind of wonder about that whole narrative. And then you realize, well, American companies have been pouring into Ukraine, trying to build factories, to build weapons. He continues to push the NATO towards the conflict line. We now have more troops that are heading towards Poland. They continue to press the drumbeat on these dummy drones that were found in Poland, possibly not flown, possibly brought in by foot or by truck. We see one drone that was duct taped together. You think that that Russia is going to duct tape a drone and then send it on an important mission? I don't think so. So anyway, we have all kinds of weird things going on. We have all these signals that he wants to build peace and all that. But we see now in his Truth Social post that we're being pushed in definitely a very conflict-oriented narrative, which President Trump continues to push out, possibly pushed on by his friends, especially like Lindsey Graham, who says all you have to do is raise the tariffs on India and China, and they will fold, and then Russia's war effort will collapse, and they will stop fighting. Well, I got news for you. Russia has all the resources it needs to keep the war going for years to come. It doesn't need India. It doesn't need China. It doesn't need anyone to buy its oil. But oil is one of the most needed resource, and we know that India is not going to stop buying Russia oil. Why? Because most of India is involved in agriculture, and you know what agriculture has. They have tractors, they have all kinds of farm equipment, they have to process everything that comes off. All that requires electricity, requires some sort of combustible for all their farm equipment. So we know that India is not going to stop. And what about China? They're building the Siberia 2 pipeline. So it's going to go through Mongolia. This will unite unite Russia, Mongolia, and China together and pull Mongolia away from the U.S. camp. So this is all going in the opposite direction. And the more President Trump pushes to try to break the chain that connects Russia with India and Russia with China, the stronger that chain's going to get. So, but anyway, let me get into the Truth Social post here, and we'll see what's going on. So, Truth Social post, Donald J. Trump at Real Donald Trump. A letter sent by President Donald J. Trump to all NATO nations and the world. So, not too sure why all the world, if this is directed towards NATO, but anyway, I am ready to do major sanctions on Russia when all NATO nations have agreed and started to do the same thing. So what happened to the red carpet in Alaska? Was that just a phony welcome ceremony to try to sweet talk President Putin into accepting a bad peace deal. So, President Putin's been around the block a few times. He can see a bad deal when it's there in front of him, and he definitely wasn't gonna be, you know, um, raising the white flag because President Trump said, "Oh, you're my friend. Here, look at the red carpet. Isn't that nice?" Okay, well, um, you know, Russia seems to be always willing to talk to people, but they're not gonna, be sweet talked into any kind of bad deal. And the fact that President Trump thought that he could do that really is unfortunately a very bad signal about his ability to communicate and understand the other side. So anyway, now we go on. We need all NATO nations to stop buying oil for Russia. One of the purchasers of oil is Turkey. Yes, Turkey. Turkey. I'm sorry, and they have um, the Turk Stream pipeline, and that's bringing Russian oil into Europe, just like the Nord Stream was bringing oil into Europe. So that's working and no problem there. We have the Duzhba pipeline that Ukraine has been bombing. That brings oil, oil, natural gas. I'm not sure, right directly into Hungary and Slovakia. So so they're not gonna stop buying that because what's the alternative? The alternative is expensive LNG from the United States. So we start to see the independent mediator is actually the guy who's gonna make the big killing if they stop Russian oil and Russian gas. So that right away should raise a red flag. Anyway, as you know, NATO's commitment to win has been far less than 100%. So is it Ukraine winning or NATO winning? I forgot. So anyway, and the purchase of Russian oil by some has been shocking. It greatly weakens your negotiating position and bargaining power over Russia. NATO has no bargaining power over Russia. Um, Russia had been working with Ukraine, and they came up with an agreement. It was guaranteed by France and Germany, and we learned later from Angela Merkel and from Francois Hollande that this was just a trick. This was a trick to trick Russia to buy time for Ukraine, to strengthen their military, to increase their military numbers, to import military equipment into Ukraine because they're not capable of building military equipment that could match up with Russia very well. So they had old Soviet equipment, but it wasn't very plentiful. So um, anyway, we know that Russia has been sincere in their commitment. It was the West which was not sincere. So they did have a bargaining power and they lost it. They threw it away. They said, "We don't care. We're going to tell Russia what to do and they have to listen and there's nothing they can do about it." Well, maybe that was in the 90s when they were on their knees financially. Their military was a shamble. But anyway, they kind of waited too long, maybe, to try to bring Ukraine into NATO. And now it's too late, and they're panicking. So, anyway, he continues on. Anyway, I'm ready to go when you are. Ready to go? Go where? Go do what? Go, what do you mean go? So, ready to go. So, he's talking about these 50 to 100% tariffs on China. Okay, what's going to happen when President Trump puts 100% tariffs on China? They're going to cut off access to all those magnets, the ones they need for the U.S. car companies, and the ones that if they don't get, it's going to shut down the U.S. car companies. So then I guess they have another source for all those magnets, or do they? So anyway, and to be fully withdrawn after the war with Russia and Ukraine is ended. So who's to say whether President Trump would withdraw those um, those tariffs or not? So do you think after China saw that that the U.S. was negotiating with the United States, and they were going to have a meeting. I mean, where they were United States was negotiating with Iran, and they were going to have a meeting. And like the day before, they were meeting. Israel attacked Iran, and then the U.S. said they knew about it ahead of time. So they were just negotiating in bad faith. So don't you think China sees that? Don't you think they have some kind of a memory of what's going on? So we know right away that China's not going to have the wool pulled over their eyes, and they're tired of all these little cheap tricks. These county fair circus tricks that they pull out, and they're not going to be buying into that any longer. They don't believe the United States. They're tired of the rhetoric. So um, that they could say, "Oh, um, okay, we'll stop buying oil from Russia," but then the United States is going to say, "Okay, so you got to forget about Taiwan, and if you continue to say this thing about the one China policy, then we're going to put 100% or 200% tariffs on you." They're going to basically, the Chinese have people who think through all this, all these different steps, this strategy, and so they're going to say, "Hey, um, if they did that to us for Russia, they're going to do that to us with Taiwan. Isn't Taiwan part of China? It is." So, they're just going to use it for something else. They're going to continue to threaten us. And if we continue to cave, then it's bad for us. So, but anyway, they got the Siberia 2 coming along. So they have everything they're going to need to run their factories. And if the United States doesn't want their products, they can send them somewhere else. But especially those magnets, yeah, those special little magnets that go in the vehicles of the U.S. Automakers. So uh, China could shut down the U.S. automakers, from what I understand, unless they can find those magnets somewhere else. So yeah, go ahead, put on 100% tariffs. I think that's what China is going to say, and we'll see the consequences. Um, so anyway, he calls it a ridiculous war. Well, if it was a ridiculous war, why was the United States involved in Ukraine since 1995, working hard to pull Ukraine out of the, you could call it the Slavic spear, and pull it into the Germanic spear? The Germany, France, UK, that's all Germanic, if you know your history. So, anyway, uh, why were they doing that? Because they wanted Ukraine to be a part of NATO, but Ukraine wasn't at the point of being able to enter into the EU and into NATO, because there were a lot of obstacles. First, as far as the EU goes, there's widespread corruption in Ukraine, and if they were to pull Ukraine into the EU, that would be like a heavy weight, and the EU boat would sink. So, and it still probably would sink if they were to pull Ukraine into NATO now. It would be worse than trying to save Greece, if you remember that whole scenario, when they had their financial collapse. So anyway, President Trump mentions here about 7,118 lives lost last week alone. Crazy. Okay, well, where's he getting these numbers from? Who's providing him with these numbers? So, if you know a little bit about the whole front line, 80% of the casualties in this conflict are coming from artillery, and Russia has a either 6-1 in some areas and even 10-1 advantage in artillery. So most of those casualties are on the Ukraine side. I think Russia is not going to be certainly as bad as Ukraine, but it's certainly not getting up to 7,000. It's hard to say where he's getting those numbers from. But anyway, if he really cared about human lives, he would do something about the whole situation in Gaza, the West Bank. Um, when he bombed Yemen, there were a lot of civilian casualties. It didn't seem to bother him at all. I'm not too sure why this is so important, but the main point here is that the United States wants Ukraine. It wants to pull Ukraine away from Russia. They've been at this since 1995. They put in billions of dollars. They have a huge investment. They want to get a strong foothold. All they want Russia to do is to say, okay, we're done, goodbye. And then they're going to pour in, and Russia knows that. So as long as they keep on pushing this scenario where they're basically telling Russia to raise the white flag and flee to Vladivostok, Russia will continue on. So that I don't know, is this reverse psychology? Why are they saying this? Because they know as long as they continue to push that narrative, Russia's going to continue. They're not going to stop, because NATO basically is the United States. So if the United States would tell the other NATO countries, okay, we're done there, we want to stop, the killing would stop. Everything would be over. And as far as Russia putting out its conditions to end this conflict, they've already put that out a long time ago, back in 2022. So let's take a look at those conditions. Territorial concessions. Why territorial concessions? Because the people living in these 4 regions in Crimea voted out of Ukraine. These are ethnic Russian regions. They don't want to be imposed on by Ukraine, that they have to give up their Russian language, culture. They were being bombed, shelled by Ukrainian forces, and Russia even tried to work hard to reconcile the two sides, the Ukrainian faction with the in Kiev, with the Ukrainian faction in these regions, and they basically said that's it. Ukraine is, Ukraine and Kiev, this puppet government that was installed in 2014 and continues to this day to be basically a U.S. controlled government, is not interested in peace, and they're certainly they were going to carry out a policy of ethnic cleansing in eastern Ukraine to push all the ethnic Russian people out. So Russia said, we're going to step in to protect the ethnic Russian, Ukrainian people, and these people have voted out. Their vote is valid in any international court. So anyway, so that was the first point. The second point is neutrality and disarmament. So basically, their military needs to disband and they need to become neutral. There's a country called Austria which became neutral after World War II, and it has benefited them entirely. They haven't been overrun by Russia. During the Cold War, they weren't overrun by the Soviet Union. Neutrality will do wonders for Ukraine, but they just don't want neutrality, and they definitely don't want to disarm. Demilitarization and denazification. Denazification, you say, there's no Nazis in Ukraine. Okay, well, have you seen the Azov Brigade? I think it's actually battalion. So they carry Nazi symbols. They have Nazi tattoos. They ascribe to the pure Ukraine race ideology, similar to the Aryan ideology. So I mean, they've kind of bought into that whole ideology of the superior race, of the ethnic purity, and of using force and violence to cleanse Ukraine of all these inferior races like the ethnic Russian people. So these were the Banderites that were part of the 2014 Maidan Revolution. So anyway, not the Nazification of Ukraine actually started a long time ago. The U.S. worked very closely to spread all these ideologies in the schools in Ukraine and to try to impose all these ideologies. Uh, any Ukrainian ethnic Russian Ukrainian who was living in Ukraine after 2014 knows what happened in the schools, all the craziness that went on. So Nazification is something that denazification something will happen in Ukraine. Then we talk about sanctions lifted. Okay, well, the return of the frozen Russian assets, which won't be given to Ukraine, of course, because Belgium said it won't, because they said it would ruin the euro, and other countries would pull their funds out of Euroclear, and that would be the end of the euro, and then they'd have to go back to all the national currencies and all of that mess. So, anyway, rights for Russian speakers, for the Russian Orthodox Church, for Russian culture. So anyway, these conditions were all put out in 2022, and so it's very clear what Russia said, that these are the conditions to end the conflict. The U.S. knows that, and they continue to say that Russia is not negotiating in good faith. Well, they're referring first to the territorial concessions. Well, didn't the European countries, the European Union, say that the vote of the people was sacred? Well, then why isn't the vote of the ethnic Russian people, who are the majority in these four regions plus Crimea, why aren't they sacred? So anyway, pick one or pick the other. Either it's sacred or it's not sacred. You can't say it's sacred in one instance and then not sacred in the other. So anyway, I want to continue on here to finish off this Truth Social post. So if NATO does as I say, the war will end quickly. No, it won't. For Russia, this is a vital national interest. They don't want NATO on their doorstep. And the moment that the conflict ends, everything to the west of that line, over towards Poland, will be NATO. And they know that. So, and President Trump knows that. That's why he wants the conflict to end now. He wants to keep this NATO territory as close to Russia as possible, because they have a long-term plan to create political chaos in Russia, break Russia up into several different chunks, and then Russia will never be able to unify again. It'll never be a quote-unquote threat to Europe. And then they'll use these chunks to attack China. That's the whole plan. The plan was first to get to Ukraine, convert it into a proxy war against Russia, weaken Russia, and then once this, Ukraine gets a victory, then declare everything west of the conflict line to be NATO, and then have them come out. They're going to defend every blade of grass of NATO. So basically, we would have NATO right on the border of Russia. So Russia is saying, hey, we're willing to stop this conflict. All we need is a neutral Ukraine. They need to disarm. And we need the ethnic Russian regions to be part of Russia, because we don't trust Ukrainians to respect them. Okay, and we need the sanctions lifted. If they did all those things, the war would be over. But they don't. So anyway, by President Trump saying that he wants to have 100% tariffs on China, then this will only create economic chaos for the planet, and this will make things worse rather than better. But basically, all these steps that President Trump is going through is strengthening BRICS, and at the end, BRICS will be stronger, and more resilient to anything the United States or NATO countries could do against it. So, um, anyway, that is my report on this Truth Social post from President Trump. I will leave a link below to everything in my description. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Come back for more. Bye bye.